I'm Alex Dykes, and this is the 2014 Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT. SRT means that this has the fire-breathing 6.4-liter V8 Hemi engine under the hood, but it also means that this model competes with a very different set of competitors. The Grand Cherokee Laredo sort of does business with the Toyota RAV4 as well as something like a Ford Edge, whereas the Overland and the Summit models are the value proposition to Land Rover's Range Rover product line. This vehicle, however, is the alternative to the BMW X5M, the Porsche Cayenne Turbo, as well as the Mercedes ML63. I realize that saying a Jeep competes with the likes of a BMW and a Porsche sounds like heresy, but let's talk pricing first. The Grand Cherokee SRT starts at $63,660, and fully loaded like we have here, it's $72,255. That's a fairly expensive Jeep. Mind you, the Mercedes ML63 starts at $97,250. A BMW X5M, which is not available for the 2014 model year, 2013 was the last year and we expect it to reappear for 2015, is $95,000. And a Porsche Cayenne Turbo is $110,000, and the Turbo S, which delivers supposed 0 to 60 times very similar to this Grand Cherokee SRT, is $146,000. With those prices in mind, what I mean about competing with the likes of the BMW and the Porsche, I'm not talking about price tag competition. I'm talking about on-the-road competition, 0 to 60 times, performance driving dynamics, as well as the fact that there are no other performance mid-sized SUVs out on the market. General Motors doesn't make one, Ford doesn't make one, so what else would you compare a Jeep to? Whereas previous generations of the Grand Cherokee had front ends that were very similar trim level to trim level, 2014 brings a little bit more differentiation with fairly unique headlamps. These are shared between the Overland as well as the Summit model, and they are fairly attractive, although this little area that you're seeing right here below the headlamp is a headlamp washer. That's why it has this funky little cutout. If you look at the Laredo model, the headlamp fills this entire area and it doesn't look quite so strange. It's really the only thing that I dislike about the front end. I really like the fact that the front end isn't crazy. If you take a look at the BMW X5M and the X6M, the front end just is out of proportion to the rest of the car. It looks a little bit cartoonish, just a tiny bit. And the Porsche Cayenne looks like someone jacked up a 911 or inflated it. Either way, the Jeep has a very classic look up front. It doesn't scream something wicked this way comes, however, so if you want that, then you're going to need to look elsewhere. The SRT Grand Cherokee doesn't just get a unique grille and lower valence, it also gets a unique hood with these functional air scoops right here. They're not very visible from the front of the vehicle yet again, so the Grand Cherokee is just a little bit discreet about its performance characteristics. The 2014 Grand Cherokee styling is elegant and universally loved. That's a sharp contrast from the all-new 2014 Cherokee styling, which is universally debated. Back here we have a tasteful amount of trim, and we have panel gaps and pieces that fit very well in the Grand Cherokee. This is probably the best fit and finish job that Chrysler has ever done, and that speaks to the new target market for the Grand Cherokee. Without any real domestic competition for this kind of 5-seat SUV, they're really targeting the Grand Cherokee a little bit further up market, and really as an alternative to the German and English competition. Back here we have a fairly tasteful amount of trim in the SRT model. We have these enormous exhaust tips, some fake diffuser grills back here. These are not functional, but most importantly for 2014, behind this panel, we have towing ability in the SRT version. We have 7,200 pounds of towing ability, standard 2-inch receiver, 7-pin and 4-pin wiring harness right back there. The Grand Cherokee SRT is an alternative to and not an imitation of the English and German competition. That's really obvious right here under the hood, because instead of a smaller displacement direct injection forced induction engine, that'd be either a supercharger or 2 turbochargers, you find a massive 6.4-liter pushrod Hemi V8 engine. This engine's good for 470 horsepower at 6,000 RPM and 465 pound-feet of torque at 4,300 RPM. The power output characteristics of this engine are very different than the competition. This engine isn't old, so don't let those Top Gear episodes or other people from Europe fool you. Just because this is a push-rodded engine doesn't mean it's a bad engine. It is a thoroughly modern engine design, has cylinder deactivation, variable cam phasing, all manner of new and modern features going on right here in this engine. It's a brand new engine as well, recently replacing the 6.1-liter engine which Chrysler used to use under the hood of their SRT models. The big difference between this and the forced induction competition is that if you're in a BMW X5M or a Porsche Cayenne Turbo, you have to wait for those turbos to spool up, and there's nothing to spool up on this engine. It's really obvious once we get out on the road and we start talking about 0 to 30 times. Pay close attention to that later in this review. 2014 brings ZF's latest 8-speed automatic transmission to the Grand Cherokee SRT, and that's further proof that this drivetrain is far from old school. This is exactly the same transmission that you'll find under the hood of performance Rolls-Royce and Bentley models, and strangely enough, it's also the exact same transmission you'll find behind the engines of the BMW X5 as well as the Porsche Cayenne. SRT trim bumps the curb weight up to 5,150 pounds. If that sounds heavy to you, then check out the BMW and the Porsche curb weight, because they're not exactly light either. The only real lightweight in this segment is the all-new and very aluminum-intensive Range Rover and Range Rover Sport. 54% of the weight in the SRT is up front, 46% is in the rear. It's a little bit more front-heavy than the likes of the BMW and the Porsche, and that's because of this massive 6.4-liter engine. Chrysler makes up for that just a little bit by putting the same 295 45R20 tires all the way around, rather than using a staggered rubber arrangement like BMW does in the X5M. If you haven't noticed by now, these rotors are enormous. These are 15-inch rotors with 6-piston Brembo calipers up front, 4-piston calipers in the rear. These are positively enormous tires and positively enormous brakes. We have 8.3 inches of ground clearance here. That's definitely down from the likes of the Limited, the Overland, as well as the Summit model. I found front seat comfort in the Grand Cherokee to be good, but you should spend a decent amount of time in these seats before you sign on the dotted line, like you should in any vehicle. We have a multi-way power adjustable driver's seat with a 4-way adjustable lumbar support. One of the things that I found odd about this seat is that, like many of Chrysler's recent seat designs, it feels like you're sitting on the seat rather than in the seat. The center portion of the bottom seat cushion is very firmly bolstered, so it feels like you're sitting on top of maybe a cushion or something. The seat is also not as heavily bolstered as the German competition, which is bad for some people but good if you're a larger person. We also have a 4-way tilt telescopic steering wheel with a 2-position memory setting, and that controls the seat, the steering wheel, as well as your mirrors. Rear seats are comfortable, but they're not quite as plush as the front seats. We do have reclining seat mechanisms, which is very nice in these seats. They do recline a decent amount. This is the most reclined position, and then you can also move them to the most upright position to help you square off that cargo area. This same handle is used for folding the seat backs forward, so you can put larger cargo items in the Grand Cherokee, and these seats do fold flat with the cargo load floor, which is a nice feature. This front seat is adjusted for a 6'5" passenger I had in the vehicle. So you can see I still have about 1 inch of legroom there left. I do have a decent amount of headroom, even though our Grand Cherokee SRT is equipped with this large panoramic sunroof. This generation Grand Cherokee does not have a very severe hump in the middle for the driveline, which means that a middle passenger can sit fairly comfortably in this middle seat for a while. I also have a decent amount of headroom going on right here. Even though the Grand Cherokee SRT comes with run-flat tires, we still have an enormous spare tire right here under this hatch in the cargo area. This is not a full-size spare tire, nor is it a matching rim, but it is an enormous tire. It's 245/65 R18, which is an enormous tire for a spare. It's pretty easy to stuff large cargo in the Grand Cherokee thanks to these metal rails on the load floor. One thing to keep in mind, however, is that if you're handling up to the SRT's potential, you'll be having your cargo sliding around an awful lot because these rails are pretty slippery and your bag will be bouncing around the trunk. Overall, we score 9 out of 10 points in our exclusive Trunk Comfort Index thanks to a large, well-upholstered cargo area and a power hatch. Let's do a quick look around the interior. We have height adjustable seat belts right there for the driver and passenger. We have a multi-way adjustable headrest in the SRT model. Down here you can see the SRT gets these faux suede inserts. This is Alcantara in the seat, as well as the leather upper. The seats do come in 2 different color choices. There is this black as well as a tan option. Over here on the doors we have a stitched leather upper right there, and that's above the carbon fiber trim there, and a hard injection plastic below that with a stitched pleather armrest. Moving over to the dashboard, we can see this is one of the things that Chrysler has been doing extremely well lately, and this is a hand-stitched full leather dashboard right here. The leather extends all the way, again, to the carbon fiber trim with hard injection molded plastic below that. We have our glove box right here, 2-level. This is where you can put your instruction manuals, and then a decent amount of space right here. It is suitable for a 11-inch tablet PC. Moving over to the center of the dash, we have our large 8.4-inch Uconnect Touchscreen system. If you want to know more about this, then click that link at the bottom of your screen. We're not going to clutter up these videos with infotainment reviews from now on. Down below that, we have physical buttons for our climate control system, as well as physical buttons for the collision warning system. Our Eco button, that's something new for 2014 in the SRT model. It'll only work if you're in auto and in drive. So if the transmission selector, which is right down here, is in sport, or the drive mode selector right down here is in any of these other options, then that Eco button won't work. The Eco button basically forces the transmission to start off in second gear. It also causes it to be just a little bit more aggressive with its cylinder deactivation program. Right here you'll find your Uconnect auxiliary inputs. We have a USB input, secure digital card slot, as well as a regular stereo mini auxiliary input. I have my iPhone in there right now. Moving further down, we have 2 large cup holders. These are suitable for the largest size takeouts you can find in an American drive-thru. The drive mode select right below the shifter and the cup holders controls the all-wheel drive system as well as some of the electronic systems in the Grand Cherokee. Right over here we have launch control to maximize acceleration, track mode, sport mode, auto, snow, tow, etc. The difference between these modes is both how the system apportions power front and rear. Auto is 60% to the rear, sport is 65%, track is 70% to the rear, and snow and tow are 50-50. But it also changes the way the electronic stability control programs and other systems work in the vehicle, from the suspension stiffness to stability and traction control to a wide variety of other features, throttle mapping, as well as transmission shift logic. Moving over to the center console, you'll find the optional single disc CD player. If you do want a bit more center console storage, I suggest skipping that, because as you can see, this is not a very large center console, although we do have a 12-volt power plug right here. 2014 brings this brand new SRT steering wheel, has this gorgeous flat bottom, very chunky rims. It's also heated in the Grand Cherokee SRT. This button module right over here controls that multi-information display and instrument cluster right there on the dashboard. These are our phone and voice command buttons. Over here we have separate buttons for our standard cruise control as well as our radar cruise control. We have these shift paddles right here behind the steering wheel, and you'll notice that they're only on the top. And that's because if we look behind them on the steering wheel, we have our audio control buttons right behind them. So this is volume up and down, and then on the other side of the steering wheel we have track up and down and mode select. The paddles move in and out, as you can see right there. I'm a huge fan of this LCD disco dash that's spreading its way across Chrysler's various brands. Right here we have our large speedometer in the center. This is selectable between an analog speedometer as well as a digital speedometer, so we'll show you that right now. It's all controlled via that 5-button array on the steering wheel I showed you earlier. You can change to kilometers, you can get vehicle information from tire pressure, transmission, oil pressure, auxiliary gauges there, like that. The terrain mode doesn't do a whole lot in the Grand Cherokee SRT because there's only one mode in this suspension system, so you can't see wheel articulation, etc. But it does show you what your steering angle is at the moment. Right down here we have our safety systems. We have our fuel economy display, as well as a separate display for our trip fuel economy. Moving down, we have our audio display. The one disappointing thing about this disco dash is if you're playing something from your iPod, it just says iPod. But if you're playing something from the radio or from Sirius XM, it will show you what's playing via that little display right there. No particular system messages. This is where you set up the screen. We have SRT specific information here, peak G-forces, 0 to 60 timers, 60 to 0 timers, quarter-mile timers, etc. Moving on down, something that's also very interesting is we can now get diagnostic trouble codes out of the system. So if we had something in the system that we needed to see, you just press OK. It would run the diagnostic trouble codes and tell you what they were. Before we dive into the specifics, let's get two numbers out of the way first. 1.37 seconds to 30, 4.1 seconds to 60. Those are incredibly fast numbers for an SUV, especially an SUV as heavy as the Grand Cherokee SRT. Those times are made possible by this 8-speed automatic. And that 0 to 60 and 0 to 30 time are when you're using first gear. Normally, if you're just in drive and you're in auto mode in this drive mode select dial, then you're going to be starting off in second gear from a stop. If you engage sport mode in the transmission in any of those drive select modes, or if you engage sport mode or track mode, then the transmission will start off in first gear. And first gear is pretty low in this 8-speed automatic, and that's what really gives you that incredibly low 0 to 30 time. Those incredible numbers are all down to this 8-speed automatic transmission that's been made by ZF of Germany. This is the same automatic transmission that you'll find under the hood of a wide variety of performance vehicles, from BMWs to Porsches and Jaguars, etc., and it is an incredible transmission. Chrysler has programmed it to blip the throttle shifts in this transmission as well, so if you're using these paddles on the back of the steering wheel, this 6.4-liter engine will now blip the throttle for you. And the gear ratios in this transmission are very well designed. It really improves not just the 0 to 30 time, but also passing performance in this transmission, etc. The old Grand Cherokee SRT just felt like it never had the right gear for you, and it's not the engine's fault. 470 horsepower, 465 pound-feet of torque is an awful lot of oomph, but the transmission just wasn't there for you. This transmission has the right gear ratio for everything that you can imagine. And it also allows this transmission to dig a little bit deeper when it's downshifting versus that old 5-speed automatic, and the difference is night and day. No real changes in terms of handling for 2014. We still have those extremely wide tires out there on all four corners. We can pull 0.88 Gs on a skid pad in this Grand Cherokee SRT, which is absolutely insane. Let's go over the electronic devices going on here in the Grand Cherokee. The first thing is that drive mode select. If we're in auto mode, it's sending 60% of the power to the rear. If we're in sport mode, it's spending 65% of the power to the rear. And if we're in track mode, the power split goes up to 70% to the rear. If you're in the tow mode or the snow mode, it's around 50% evenly split front and rear for better traction. Track mode disables the traction control system, but not the stability control system in the Grand Cherokee. And it does so that you can get a little bit of tail happiness without losing control quite so easily on the track. Like all SRT models, if you really want to disable the stability control system, you can completely defeat it with that little button there on the dash. The Drive Mode Select also controls the active dampers in the Grand Cherokee SRT. This is very different than the system that's employed in the Grand Cherokee Overland and the Grand Cherokee Summit. Those use an air suspension system, and this is not an adaptive height air suspension. This has the same ride height all the time, and they basically install electronically controlled valves inside the regular dampers in the car. So we have regular steel coils, essentially regular dampers that are just electronically controlled. That adaptive suspension really helps this vehicle be a daily driver kind of vehicle. It's very easy to live with this car on a daily basis. You can take your kids to school, you can drive to work, you can drive home, and then you can find your favorite mountain road, stick it in sport or in track, and then really have an awful lot of fun out on the road. It means that you don't have to sacrifice ride performance and ride softness for an excellent handling vehicle. Unlike many of the other adaptive suspension systems that we saw in vehicles maybe around 2005 or 2006, there are very few drawbacks to this system. The only one that comes to mind is that regardless of what the dampers are set to, you can't change the spring rate in the vehicle. It does result in some slightly odd handling feel every now and then, but overall this is an awful lot more normal than any of the other adaptive suspension technologies that are out on the market. The other thing that makes this vehicle a good blend between performance and daily driver is the exhaust note. You get an awful lot of great sound from that 6.4 liter V8, but it's not annoying and it's not obnoxious, and it never sounds boy racer. So you can be driving along the freeway and you're not going to get a headache from the exhaust note, but it is going to sound really great when you're out on your favorite winding mountain road. Fuel economy is obviously not a performance vehicle strong suit, and that's true in this vehicle as well. We've been averaging about 14.5 to 15 miles per gallon. Although the 2014 Grand Cherokee SRT does have a cylinder deactivation system that's available only when you're in auto mode and in regular drive, and then you have this little eco button set to eco in the dashboard. It's very unnoticeable, both in terms of operation and honestly so far in terms of fuel economy benefit. We haven't really noticed a big difference between the eco mode being on and eco mode being off, although we have been spending an awful lot of time with the accelerator pedal mashed to the floor, so that is something to keep in mind. And I suspect if you have a Grand Cherokee SRT, you'll be in a very similar situation because it is an awful lot of fun to romp on the throttle. The steering is a little bit fidgety in this Grand Cherokee. It's also not very precise and an awful lot number than the rest of the competitors. However, those competitors are very important to keep in mind because the Grand Cherokee is an awful lot cheaper than all of them. The only things that really compete with this are the Mercedes ML63, the BMW X5N, and the high-end versions of the Porsche Cayenne Turbo. This is actually faster than the last X5M that we tested to 60. Not quite as fast in the quarter mile, but definitely faster to 60. However, this is $30,000 cheaper than the BMW X5M, as often configured, about $40,000 with that X5M configured the way you'd probably want to buy it, and half the price of the Porsche Cayenne Turbo that has the same performance. For that, I would give up all the steering feel in the world because the handling performance in the Grand Cherokee is very close to those others as well. The Grand Cherokee doesn't have the electronic torque distributing rear axle that you get in some of those other competitors, but honestly, you don't notice it that much out on the road. We still have very good performance and very good handling characteristics in this Grand Cherokee, even though we don't have those additional electronic doodads. And again, this is $30,000 to $60,000 cheaper than the competition. And that means that the Grand Cherokee SRT is not only an incredible performance machine, it's also an incredible value. Compared with the BMW X5M or the Porsche Cayenne Turbo, the Grand Cherokee SRT doesn't feel as refined or as planted on the road. The steering is definitely not quite as good as those other vehicles either. However, when you consider the price of the Grand Cherokee, the difference between the BMW X5M and the Porsche is incredibly small. I mean, we're talking 95% of the feel, 95% of the performance for 60% of the price. I've had the Grand Cherokee SRT out on Laguna Seca, and I can tell you this is an amazing vehicle on the track and on the road. If you haven't experienced one, you definitely should, and if you're taking a look at something like a BMW X5M or a Porsche Cayenne, then you should put the Grand Cherokee SRT on your list and give it a serious drive before you spend an awful lot more cash just for the brand name. The Grand Cherokee SRT8 is a perfect example of what Chrysler does best. Pardon my language, but Chrysler does batshit crazy really, really well, and they've had a long history of that, from the 1994 Dodge Ram pickup truck with its big rig-like styling, the Prowler, the PT Cruiser, the original Viper, the original Dodge Ram SRT pickup truck, which was pretty insane with that Viper V10 jammed under the hood, and this Grand Cherokee is really just the modern interpretation of that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you need to get behind the wheel of a Grand Cherokee SRT, because what this vehicle can do is absolutely insane, and it seems to break all the laws of physics, having 5,150 pounds that can perform and handle like this vehicle can. But more than that, the Grand Cherokee SRT is honest-to-goodness competition for the ML63, the BMW X5M, and the Porsche Cayenne Turbo S. I'm not just talking about performance figures, however, although the Grand Cherokee does stack up extremely well, delivering performance and handling abilities that's about 95% of the Cayenne as well as the BMW X5M. The big thing is that it does that for about 70% of the cost, with a 5-year, 100,000-mile warranty. The Grand Cherokee is also the perfect sleeper in this segment, because if you're driving a BMW X5M, people expect it to be fast. And if you're driving a Porsche Cayenne, people expect that to be fast as well, although people frequently discover that the base Porsche Cayenne non-turbo and 6-cylinder models really aren't that fast. That's a little bit depressing for people that have spent that kind of money on a Porsche. The Grand Cherokee is incredibly fast, and it will also surprise an awful lot of people, because it doesn't look that fast on the outside. It has these definite visual clues front and rear to something wicked this way comes, but it overall does not look as outrageous as the German competition. Now comes the question, would I buy one? Yes, I would definitely buy a Grand Cherokee SRT if I had $70,000 hanging around. That's probably obvious in my own personal vehicle collection, because I have a Saab 9.7 Aero with the 6-liter V8 engine under the hood, and I got it because it can tow and because it's fast. That really describes the Grand Cherokee to a T. This is the ultimate crossover vehicle. 470 horsepower, all-wheel drive, enormous tires, excellent handling characteristics. We have a big cargo area back here. It seats 5 in comfort, very nice interior, and it can tow 7,200 pounds. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2014 Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT. Be sure and click that subscribe banner at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and comment on this video, especially if you were offended by me calling this vehicle batshit crazy, and we'll see you next week.